The man in the bakery was smiling. An ordinary act, an everyday occurrence, except his smile didn't reach his eyes. They remained cold, lifeless, like two polished marbles reflecting a distorted world. That's when the first tremor of unease ran down John's spine. The world, once a familiar comfort, began to feel like a stage set, the people mere actors. Their movements were too deliberate, their words rehearsed. John hurried out, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The sun felt too bright, the colours too vivid. The laughter of children playing in the park grated on his nerves, their joyous shrieks sounding like the cries of something inhuman. He pressed on, seeking refuge in the familiar chaos of his apartment building. But even the familiar felt wrong. The air hung heavy, thick with an unseen tension. His landlady, usually a chatty woman, merely nodded, her eyes holding a strange, knowing glint. John fumbled with his keys, his hand trembling. He needed to get inside to shut out the world that suddenly felt so alien. Reaching his apartment door, John caught his reflection in the tarnished brass of the peephole. His face, normally unremarkable, seemed distorted, his eyes wide and haunted. A stranger stared back at him, fear, raw and primal, coiled in the pit of his stomach. The apartment offered no solace. The silence was deafening, broken only by the incessant ticking of the grandfather clock he'd inherited from his grandmother. Each tick was a hammer blow against his sanity. The walls seemed to press in, suffocating him. He drew the curtains, plunging the room into an unsettling gloom. He tried to distract himself, but the outside world had seeped into his sanctuary. The television flickered with news reports of bizarre occurrences, unexplained phenomena, people acting strangely, violently. Every report was another crack in the facade of reality, fueling the growing paranoia within him. The phone rang, the shrill sound making him jump. He stared at it, heart hammering. He knew with chilling certainty that it wasn't a friendly voice on the other end. It would be another one of them, hiding behind a facade of normalcy. He let it ring, the unanswered call a testament to his crumbling sanity. Sleep offered no escape. Nightmares plagued him, filled with distorted faces and accusing eyes. He would wake in a cold sweat, the line between dream and reality blurring. He was adrift in a sea of madness, the familiar landmarks of his life swallowed by the waves. The line was crossed during a routine trip to the grocery store. The cashier, a young woman with vacant eyes and a plastic smile, looked at him a beat too long. Her voice, when she spoke, was a robotic monotone, devoid of any human inflection. "That'll be $12.50, sir," she said, her eyes boring into him. That was it, the confirmation he needed. She wasn't real, none of them were. They were puppets, automatons, put here to mock him. He felt a surge of rage, hot and consuming. He wouldn't be mocked, he wouldn't be controlled. John lunged, his hand clamping over her mouth, stifling her surprised gasp. Her eyes widened in genuine fear, the first real emotion he had seen in days. This only fueled his rage. She wasn't supposed to react like that, it was all wrong. He didn't remember much of what happened next. A blur of motion, the metallic tang of blood, the screams of onlookers that sounded distant and unimportant. He walked out of the store, leaving chaos and terror in his wake, a strange sense of calm washing over him. The unreal had been dealt with. Back in his apartment, John surveyed his handiwork. His clothes were stained, his hands trembling slightly, but he felt no remorse, no guilt, only a sense of grim satisfaction. He had done what was necessary. He had peeled back the layer of artifice, exposed the truth beneath. He turned on the television expecting to see news of his actions, but there was nothing. The news played on, a loop of mundane events and forced smiles. A chill ran down his spine. They were covering it up. They didn't want the truth to get out. He knew then that he was alone, surrounded by the unreal, the unliving. He was a prisoner in his own life, the bars invisible but no less real. He paced his apartment, a caged animal, his mind racing. He had to do something, had to fight back. The phone rang again, and this time he answered. A raspy voice greeted him, filled with amusement and something else, something colder. "You're doing well," the voice said, "but you're not finished yet. There are more of them out there, so many more." The voice on the phone, whoever it belonged to, was right. They were everywhere, on the streets, in the shops, in the flickering images on his television screen. Their faces swam before his eyes, a grotesque gallery of the unreal. He became a phantom drifting through the city, his only purpose to expose them, to tear down their charade. He saw the telltale signs everywhere, the vacant eyes, the plastic smiles, the words that sounded rehearsed, devoid of true meaning. He left his mark on the city, a trail of chaos and fear, a whispered word, a knowing look, a sudden outburst, each interaction a confirmation of his shattered reality. The world was a stage, and he was the only one who saw the strings. But with each act of defiance, a strange sense of exhilaration grew within him. He was fighting back, striking a blow against the puppet masters. He was no longer a pawn in their game. He was the one pulling the strings now. The city became his hunting ground, his personal asylum of madness. Sleep was a luxury he could no longer afford. Food tasted like ash in his mouth. He was a man possessed, driven by a truth that only he could see. The line between reality and delusion had vanished completely. He heard whispers in the wind, saw conspiracies in the most mundane events. The world was a tapestry of lies, and he was the only one who could see the threads unraveling. The police were closing in, he could feel it. Their faces, once a symbol of authority, now filled him with a cold dread. They were in on it, of course, they had to be. They were part of the grand illusion. He became a shadow, moving from one hiding place to another, always looking over his shoulder. The city, once familiar and comforting, was now a labyrinth of paranoia and fear. They finally caught him, as they always do. He barely resisted, his body and mind exhausted from the relentless pursuit of truth. They led him away, not to a jail cell, but to a sterile white room with padded walls. A man in a white coat sat across from him, his face a mask of professional concern. The doctor, they called him. But John saw through the facade. "John," the doctor began, his voice soft and reassuring, "we're here to help you. You've been under a lot of stress lately. You're safe now." John laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Safe?" he echoed. "Safe from what? The truth?" The doctor's smile didn't falter. "Let's talk about what happened, John. Tell me about the people you saw, the things they made you do." John shook his head, his laughter turning into a sob. They would never understand. They couldn't understand. They were part of it. They were the ones who made him do it. Days turned into weeks. The doctor continued to visit, his smile unwavering, his words like a broken record. John retreated further into himself, his grip on reality slipping with each passing hour. He saw the other patients, their faces vacant, their eyes reflecting the same empty sky. They were all the same, all part of the lie. Then one day the doctor arrived with a triumphant smile. "You're making progress, John," he said, holding up a small orange pill. "This will help. It will make the nightmares go away." John stared at the pill, a sense of dread washing over him. He knew what it was. It was the final step, the ultimate betrayal. They were going to erase him, turn him into one of them. He lunged for the doctor, his hands closing around his throat. "You can't!" he screamed, his voice hoarse and desperate. "I'm the only real one left!" The doctor struggled, his eyes wide with genuine fear. This time, there was no mistaking it. It was real. And John, for the first time since his descent into madness, felt a pang of doubt. Had he been wrong all along?